This
today.
call is now being recorded.
And I'll be transcribing your quotes. In a week or two, I'll have it done and I'll send it to you and, share it with your co-author however you see fit. I just ask that you send me one version back so I'm not left to potentially
Sure.
Iron out contradictory comments. And
Okay.
The quotes, when I quote you, keep in mind your words are your own. We're on the same team. You can tweak if you want. I just would ask that you would tweak towards simplicity rather than complexity.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and so I'll be asking you questions about the paper, some to expand on things or just sometimes to put things in simpler terms. Okay, so I'll start now. So I liked how, before I start asking questions, as a former journalist and I've been a writer and editor my entire career, I found this article particularly interesting, with the semantics behind leader and manager. It was really interesting. And I liked how you pointed out, you phrased it, seemingly unconditional love for leaders and automatic dislike for managers. Is it really that strong among people, those feelings?
There's certainly variation among people that we explore in the AMD article. I have the abstract in front of me, and so the three studies, study 1, 2, and 3, there's studies within those. They're really study sets, and so within those three study sets, the first study is really looking at the question of do and how do people construe leading and managing, like end of question. And then study set 2, after we found repeatedly that there are certainly some similarities that people associate with leading and managing, but also just as certainly some differences.
I saw in the appendix how some terms overlapped.
Yeah. And so study 2 is really answering, addresses the so what question. So we find in study set 1 that people, that there is a popular kind of full categorization that people have for what leading is and what managing is. One way of summarizing that difference is that the leading the activities, we focused on activities.
Right.
So the activities that people associate most with leading tend to be kind of timeless and context free, whereas the activities that people most associate with managing are much more kind of organizationally and context sensitive. So more specifically, people associate activities like inspiring, motivating with leading, and activities like hiring and scheduling or budgeting, hiring and budgeting with managing. So
that's a good way to put it, Kevin, because I was struggling with that. It seemed like the manager, the meanings behind manager tended toward like the bureaucratic, like you said, organizational, and leader didn't necessarily even apply to businesses.
Yeah. So so there's different ways to sort of interpret those differences, but I think it's certainly true that we acknowledge in the paper, from an evolutionary perspective, that difference is interesting, right? Because the leading activities could be applicable, like you said, to any range of organizations, not just businesses.
Countries, sports teams.
Societies, right? Like pre-industrial, yep. So
tribes, anything,
Yeah, right. So study set 2 gets at the so what question, like I said, and what we find there is across a range of different scenario across a range of different versions or variations, we find a consistent tendency for people to prefer and select the leader, somebody who's the prototypical leader, even for a situation that really calls for prototypical managing activities.
Right.
So
I mean,
that's where.
Does that mean that, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, that's where the quote that you started out with comes from. That study set 2 finds across a variation of studies that this preference for prototypical leading activities seems to be strong enough to often override context sensitive decision making.
So
there's a better way to put that, but yeah.
Let me read a section. It's getting to what you're talking about. In fact, this preference is strong. I'm reading from your paper. Enough that even in situations designed to evoke preference for management, many respondents appeared largely immune to situational or contingent thinking and continued to prefer the leader. These findings speak to what has been referred to as an infatuation with or the romance of leadership in our society, where leadership is often loved for personal, historical, and ideological reasons rather than any direct connection to the facts of the situation. Beyond seeming to confirm this love of leadership, our findings highlight this preference may come at the high cost of failing to appreciate the value of management in many situations. Can you give me some examples of that high cost? Yeah.
So in the paper we cite a different project by Patrick Wright and some others, and so there's, I mean, they actually put a dollar amount on the cost of poor selection at the highest level of organizations as CEOs, and so we acknowledge that as an example in the paper. That
I didn't see that a dollar amount. Where is that?
Yeah, let's go to that. Let's see. View article, view PDF. Let's see. Yeah, if you do a keyword search for let me find my copy. WRIGHT. We probably don't have the dollar amount, but that paper that we cite by Wright.
Okay, yeah, you cited the paper, but there wasn't a dollar amount cited. Okay.
Yeah. So
I did read your paper. I read it once and then went through parts of it again. So
no, this is why, and the paper is very long. So that's why I'm really especially grateful for what you're doing here. So yeah.
Is that talking about just having the wrong manager in the wrong managerial role, or specifically putting someone who is seen as a leader in a leadership position who doesn't have the managerial skill, the perceived managerial skills that's needed?
Do you want to rephrase the question?
You and I can both have the same managerial skills or the same or similar managerial skills and leadership skills and still not fit in an organization. You know, we might fit in different organizations better. So are you referring to just getting the wrong manager in the wrong managerial spot, or is it specifically what happens when you prefer, when you say the high cost of failing to appreciate the value of management in many situations? We're talking about promoting leaders, people who are perceived to have these leadership skills and who don't have the necessary management skills, and that causes the failures.
I think it's probably the former of the two that you just identified. Okay. And so study set 2 is as much as anything about identifying this fit problem, that this preference for this general preference for the prototypical leader seems to, like I said, override or be stronger than tends to be stronger than the kind of decision, tends to override the kinds of decisions that people would, you'd expect people to make if they were being more attentive to situational needs of an organization. And so, if you look at one of the tables near the end that analyzes some of the rationales that people had for the one of the study two decisions, and still don't have the paper. Oh wait, here it is.
The two scenarios.
So there's
assume you're considering buying stock in two companies, or assume you would buy total.
I'm trying. Let's see. Let me see. Where's this? So table 5.
Okay.
So if you can go to table 5.
I'm looking at that.
Let's see. So table 5 actually involves study 3, which we haven't talked about yet. But the relevant part here is maybe a good segue to study set 3. So if you look at table 4 first, right?
Okay.
So if you look at table 4, you can see the rationales that people have for their decisions, and the first 2 might be the most interesting, where some people have the rationales for their decisions where that either a prototypical leader is always more valuable, or a prototypical manager is always more valuable, and so there are some people who just hold true or steadfast to one of those views, and what we find is in study set 2 that there's more people who subscribe to this view that the prototypical leader is going to be the solution in any situation than the other. Yeah.
Is it always situational, or is it fair to say that from your findings that organizations are generally overvaluing people seen as having those leadership qualities and undervaluing people seen as having those managerial qualities, while both kinds of qualities are needed for both types of perceived roles?
On an organization by organization basis, that might be that could be misinterpreted. What you just said.
Okay.
So, but certainly we do throughout the paper identify that there seems to have been there's definitely seems to have been celebration of these prototypical leader activities, and and study 2 points to cost associated with that, right? So the so what question is that if people are overvaluing prototypical leading generically, then on case-by-case basis, when situations exist that call more for the prototypical managing, then that's where this general preference for prototypical leading becomes a problem, becomes costly. Yeah.
In simple terms, tell me about study 3. How you slowed down the decision-making process so people didn't just have a knee-jerk reaction toward leaders versus managers, and how that and the results of that.
Right. So study set 2 addresses the so what question, and then study set 3 addresses the question of, well, what can we do to improve? How can we improve the decision-making problems that we identify in study set 2, right? And so the answer to the question, the focus of what we did in study set 3 is slowing people down. And so across study set 3, we had two main conditions. One was having people make decisions relatively fast, and the other was having people, prompting people to deliberate on the context or situational needs before they made a decision. So those were the two contrasting conditions. And what we found was that slowing people down appears to improve the context sensitivity of the decisions they make with respect to, this general preference for the prototypical leader, tending to, like we found in study set 2, tending to override attention to situational needs. So study set 3 slows people down, helps people be more attentive to situational needs, and consequently helps to override or counterbalance the strong preference, the strong initial preference or strong the strong initial preference for, or the strong preference we found in study 2. I'll leave it at that. The strong preference we found in study set 2 for prototypical leader, prototypical leading.
Kevin, the Appendix A, you list all the. So I'm going to briefly go into methodology, so that managers are reading this understand that this is science, not speculation. But I'm not going to go so deep as to describe each element of all of the three studies. I want to know the numbers. Are they separate or do they overlap sometimes? For example, in QA, they're all separate.
Yeah. I realize they're the same number, but different people. Yeah, and you can see the different people. Yeah, the different people are reflected in the age and the gender too. So
right. So it was.
But yeah, good question.
There's a total of 2,279 people, and they were North American and European MBA students, and top-level managers were in all three. Sampled in all three studies total.
I didn't add them up. Do we have that number in the paper?
No, you don't. But I just added that column up, so that's what that is.
Okay.
And before I went into all of them, I want to put that bigger number there, and then break it down into the three studies. I just wanted to make sure that they were separate.
Okay.
And what you said, how slowing down did have an effect. That seems to be the key takeaway that you described when I'm quoting your paper again, and I'd like you to put this in simple terms, that decision makers, be they selecting people for key organizational positions or investing in organizations, should be cognizant that people tend to hold overgeneralized preferences, as we discussed, in favor of those described in leader-related terms versus manager-related terms, and these preferences hold even at the level of specific leader-associated behavioral strengths. Now, you go on to say when decision makers are commonly advised they guard against biases against female or minority candidates, or to be aware of potential downsides of narcissistic, charismatic, or overconfident leaders, much less attention is given to the risk of overvaluing leader-associated terms and strengths and undervaluing manager-associated terms and strengths. Is the issue here sometimes that they're not looking at job descriptions and roles in enough detail? And, maybe even overvaluing part of the interview process, over assessing skills or testing for skills?
Well, I chew on that. Can you rephrase that? The last part of the point of the question, the last part of it, the pointed part?
So, we're talking about selecting key people for organizational positions. I mean, basically, are they doing the interview process wrong?
Oh,
The hiring process, the recruiting process.
huh. Yeah, can I indirectly answer that first?
Sure.
And just for background too, I can share, because I've had a decent amount of media experience, so I'm gratefully appreciating that, like you said, we're on the same team here. And
yeah, so if you want to say off the record, just say it, and if so we're on the same page with the question and answer. That's no problem.
Yeah, it's not off the record, on the record thing. It's just patience. I'm going to test your patience.
No problem. Either one.
Yeah.
So we're you're answering the question I'm asking, and doing it in simple terms. That's fine.
So one of the things that there's lots of different nuggets, I think, in the paper. I wouldn't want to be quoted on that, but to say that, but I think it's true. And so, and you might have your own estimation of that, but so one of them is related to your most recent question, which is titles. So we do examine the question of, is it just are people being misled in their decision making by whether or not somebody self-identifies as a leader or manager, and we find that it appears to be no, that it's these activities, the prototypical leading activities and the prototypical managing activities that seem to be influencing this preference for prototypical leader. So it's not so that's one thing that we examined that's certainly relevant to your question, that that we find does not appear to be carrying the day or having undue influence. One of the tables, one of the figures that I think is also interesting is, let me see the exact.
Well, I'll be using one in the summary. Basically, it's a version of, I think it's when we get to 2A. So you have the top 5 terms for leader: inspires, encourages, motivates, guides, teaches. And for manager, you had supervises, fires, bosses, oversees, and budgets. And then you revise bosses to hires, which I thought was clearer.
Right.
So I was going to list. I was going to have a little graphic of that in the summary too.
Okay. Yeah. So figure 1. There's actually something. So the error bars got lost in translation on figure 1, that'll be cleaned up when the paper gets proofed for formatting. The rest of it's fine. It's just some of the error bars got lost. I don't know.
Okay.
Whatever. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So that's a detail, so figure 1, though, the more basic point of figure 1, I think is interesting. So what we found there was the leading activities and compared to managing activities, and we asked people, how learnable do you think these things are? How valuable do you think these things are? How flattered would you be if you were called great at these things? Yeah. And so you can see there we found a general pattern that people tend to think that the managing activities are more learnable, the leading activities are less learnable, and then perhaps related to that, they identify more value. They say they'd be relatively more flattered to be called a great at those leading activities compared to the managing activities.
So they're more learnable. Anybody can become a manager and if it takes more of a unique person to be a leader, I'd be more flattered to be called a leader, in other words.
Yeah. So that actually circles back to part of the intention of study set 1, which is, where one of the goals is to help draw into greater relief or help to, more clearly identify what activities people associate with leading and with managing. Because, perhaps one of the reasons for what we just talked about, the learnability question, perhaps it's reflective of people not even being sure what how to learn the leading
Right.
activities.
Yeah, because you weren't surveying only people who have the perceived qualities of leaders and only people who have the perceived qualities of managers. These are broader perceptions beyond those groups, correct?
Yeah, can you repeat that last part?
So it was you were surveying general populations of people, not just people seen as leaders and people seen as managers themselves. So they might not be familiar with what needs to be learned in either case. Is that right?
The first part's definitely right about the sampling, and the second part probably requires more specificity, but it also might not be central to your question. So,
okay, I want to ask you about another part of the paper. You wrote, because it is difficult for individuals to be ever vigilant self-monitors, specific processes are likely necessary to avoid ironic situations whereby selection processes for the most consequential positions violate basic decision-making principles that are applied rigorously when filling lower-level positions. What does that mean? Do you want me to tell you what page that's on?
Sure, yeah. Or just like two words, and then my search function will find it.
Ironic situations.
Okay, ironic. We probably just used ironic once. All right, yeah, just ironic comes up once. Okay. And so there's two co-authors, and they were both very active. It was definitely a genuine collaboration. So I don't know how you usually handle that kind of thing in terms of like quotes, but my co-authors will definitely have thoughts on what you draft, and I greatly appreciate and will absolutely abide by your what you identified in terms of protocol, where I'll shepherd this through with them, and then you'll only
also,
have to deal.
Even when I quote the article, if you prefer a similar quote from a different area, that's fine, or prefer paraphrase. But what we can't do is change quotes from the paper because the reader seeing the summary, they have to match.
Yeah. Okay. Because it is difficult for individuals of specific processes to avoid ironic selection processes for the most consequent violate basic decision-making principles that are applied rigorously. Organizations might also purposefully comprise diversity. Yeah, I think we're really just saying there, just reinforcing this point about the need to be deliberative and to have processes and to make it systematic, so that there's basically protocols in place to help ensure that decision making is more context sensitive and not falling back on what we find to be this kind of general basic context-free preference for prototypical leading. Does that help?
Yes, but what about, it said, selection committees with diversity in members, general tendency to disfavor prototypical leaders and managers. What does that mean? How does diversity?
So that's definitely, I can answer that easily. And the answer to that is actually captured in, let's see. So the answer to that's definitely captured in Table 5. So you can see, so Table 5, what's interesting to us about Table 5 is that, like I might have said really early in our conversation about heterogeneity or variation in individual responses, so what I meant by that was, we find these patterns and tendencies that we've talked about. At the same time, we also find, interesting variation or heterogeneity within that. And what I mean by that is captured in this Table 5. So Table 5 is showing that, is drilling down past the main finding of study set 3. So the main finding of study set 3 is that when you slow people down, ask them to deliberate on the context or situational needs, then their decisions tend to be better, or tend to be more context sensitive. So study set, what Table 5 is showing is that yes, and so yes, that's the case, and there also are certainly people who, no matter what, whether they're slowed down or sped up, that they still hold steadfast to their own individual position or belief that either the manager is always, either prototypical manager is always more valuable or the prototypical leader is always more valuable. So that right. Reference to diversity is a reference to the fact that we, explore, and it's in Table 5, explore in relation to Table 5, which is that even with the slowing down versus fast condition, there's still people in those. So what's highlighted in Table 5 are the people who are kind of off pattern, where you can see the green lighting in the upper right of Table 5. That's the people.
I understand now. I get it. Okay. So it's okay. It's diversity in their beliefs. How do you build a selection committee to ensure that? I mean, do you have to do surveys of your members? Do you always? Is that literally how you would do that?
I would say that among the areas of future research that are identified by the new article in Press is exploration and identification of characteristics that are associated with who are the people and why do some people seem to have these steadfast views that either the leader is either the prototypical leader is always more valuable or the prototypical manager is always more valuable. So our studies don't examine that. That's not the focus. So that's not the focus of our studies. It's that we're just identifying that, and future research will need to.
Got it. Although, just from a purely logical standpoint, wouldn't it be better to have all selection committee members agnostic to whether favoring prototypical leaders or prototypical managers and only looking at the candidate and the position?
If I take your question, I mean, would it be ideal for selection committee members to kind of be bias free with respect to?
Yeah.
Then yes, I think it's.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand now. Let's see what else.
But that's against the backdrop, right? It's against that observation's against the backdrop of study set 2, where we found this general. Where we found that people are often not bias free, right, with respect to that.
Right. Got it. So it'd be harder to build a selection committee with purely bias-free members, I guess.
Yeah, with respect to this prototypical leading and managing.
I'm cognizant of our time, Kevin. I just 2 questions. You're giving an elevator speech to a manager or business leader about the key finding or key findings of your article. What would you say?
Yeah, well, let me just backtrack for a second. That's why I'm excited about the insights piece that you're going to be leading, and also the whiteboard for the exact same reason as you're asking me that question. So I'd say that we have 3 study sets. Study set 1 examines this what's what in terms of how do people what activities do people associate with leading and managing. Prototypically, study set 2 addresses the so what question, and we find a general strong preference for prototypical leading, even in a situation calling for prototypical managing. And then study set 3, we find that it appears that slowing people down and asking and having them contemplate actively the situational needs appears to help with increasing the context sensitivity of decisions that they make.
Okay.
Does that help?
My last that's fine. My last question, though, isn't for the summary. It's just after reading your paper, something occurred to me about insights. So and if you could just give me your opinion on this, we initially used a phrase as a descriptor for insights, an online magazine for managers and business leaders. And lately, though, we, felt that, managers and business leaders is mostly redundant. But reading your paper and seeing how people have such, a wide discrepancy in what managers are to them and what leaders are, it seems like we need to say both. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'd be inclined to think that that your current tagline is valuable, right?
With both terms, manager and business. Yeah, because I think after reading this, not saying both will mean a lot of people might not see that it's for them. Oh, I'm just a leader. Or I'm a manager, or they'll see it. The audience is only half the audience.
Yeah. So, we're trying to study set 1 is basically attempting to provide fresh empirical grounds or fresh empirical grounding to this question of how do people construe leading, what activities specifically, because that's a much more specific. That's much more specific than saying what traits or what things do people associate with leading and managing. So we're focused on activities and so study set 1 is intended the fresh empirical grounding and as compared to just relying on previous theorizing by people.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time, Kevin. I really appreciate your time and thoughtful responses. Did you have any questions for me?
No, so I'll look forward to working on this with you. And please check in with me on email if any other questions come up, as you're working on a first draft. So.
Otherwise, I'll have it to you within a week or 2.
Great. Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot. I greatly appreciate your help with this.
Thank you, Kevin. Take care.
Sure, you too. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Kevin. Take care.
Sure, you too. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Kevin. Take care.
Sure, you too. Bye.
Bye-bye.